It's the new year. Normally that means it's time to start thinking about baseball again. Time to start thinking about pitchers and catchers reporting and then the season coming up. But of course, we are in a lockout. We have been in a lockout since December 1st. And so we're going to talk today about this Jeff Passan ESPN article talking about the state of the lockout and the state of the negotiations. Nothing is really happening. And so we're going to hear from some sources. We're going to talk about what is going on and what is the likeliest path forward for Major League Baseball. So all of that next on today's Locked On Giants.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants Baseball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes actually 3 days a week for now, eventually returning to 5 days a week, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So hello to those of you watching on YouTube. And if you haven't checked us out there already, please do. And please subscribe. We're getting close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. So if you can do that, it would help me out a lot. Anyway, coming up on today's show, there's a lot to talk about from this Jeff Passan ESPN article. So I kind of want to jump right into it, but basically we're just going to be looking through the entire article at all the key points about the state of the lockout with spring training approaching, because we're getting to the point where you start to potentially lose spring training time, and then you start to lose spring training games, and then eventually perhaps we start to get to the point where we're going to lose regular season baseball. So the article is by Jeff Passan on ESPN, and it's called Why MLB's Labor Negotiations Have Gone Nowhere and Baseball's Path Back. So right off the bat, Jeff Passan says that he's speaking with a source who is, quote, a longtime baseball man. This man is not an alarmist. He has intimate knowledge of how the relationship between the league and the players' union works, or rather doesn't work, and he has grown increasingly cynical about the parties reaching a deal anytime soon. So then the source goes on to say, quote, we're in such a place as an industry that it's kind of like politics. Everyone is so obsessed with winning this narrow game we've prescribed for ourselves. There's no practicality, no moderation. So Jeff Passan then goes on. We're going to be reading a lot out of this, and I'm going to pause when I feel like it's necessary to kind of some feedback, some context, whatever it may be. But Jeff Passan says that he's talking about how baseball seems shocking, not shockingly, but it seems irrelevant right now, and that's not a good thing, because if you go to MLB's website, this is what he says, quote, MLB's website looks like an old GeoCities page, and its TV network is in permanent rerun mode. Pitchers and catchers reporting in mid-February gets less likely by the minute, and after 36 days of silence since the lockout began, there remain no plans for the sides to talk about the core economic issues that cleave them. He goes on to say, quote, perhaps nothing better illustrates how far apart MLB and the MLB Players Association remain than their last bargaining session on December 1st. Over the previous few months, both believed they had offered concessions. Both sneered at the other's proposals. This session at a luxury hotel in Dallas offered one last opportunity. It might take a miracle, but at least they would try. That afternoon, the sides talked for 7 minutes, before the meeting broke up at midnight, the owners locked out the players. The consequences continue to reverberate. Earlier in the day, MLB had said it wanted to talk about core economics, but only on the condition that those discussions not include any changes to the 6-year reserve period of free agency, the arbitration system, or revenue sharing. The union would not agree to that condition. Ben interjecting here. Of course they wouldn't. Those are like some of the main things that they want. And so just to that, say you have to concede that you're not even going to let us discuss these things is ridiculous by the league. And I understand why the players rejected that. So continuing to Passan, he says, quote, 7 minutes in, there was nothing left to discuss. MLB left the hotel and did not return. And now, 5 weeks later, the fallout of the failed discussions remains unresolved, according to sources. The union believes it's the league's turn to make an offer, and according to a source, MLB is working on proposals to bring to the table. 5 days into the new year, there still isn't a bargaining session on the calendar. The lack of urgency, particularly considering the sport's history of failed negotiations, is the cause for most concern among the 27 people with whom ESPN spoke in recent weeks, including officials from the league and union, players, owners, agents, club executives, and others familiar with the current state of affairs. That the two parties have fallen into the same habits they exhibited during the disastrous back and forth that ended with Commissioner Rob Manfred implementing a 60-game season in 2020 has done little to foster optimism. So coming up next, we're going to continue to read through this and continue to pause and interject some analysis and some takeaways that we see. But we are going to tie it into the 2020 negotiations, which we covered on this show, and it was disastrous. I think Jeff Passan's choice of words there was spot on. It was disastrous. And so we're going to continue to read through this in a minute. But first, it's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. And Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you'll want to eat it. Unlike bars, which can be chalky, waxy, or taste like a chemical spill. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring. By week 3, you might be thinking, and let's be honest, maybe even before week 3, maybe right about now, you might be thinking, this isn't worth it. Show me the chocolate. Well, Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So it's just a no-brainer. Choose the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but you can feel good about it and you can be sticking to those New Year's resolutions. And right now, if you go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your next order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, here we go. We are going to continue talking about this ESPN piece by Jeff Passan. I talked the other day about the Ken Rosenthal situation, and I said Rosenthal would be on my Mount Rushmore of current baseball reporters. Well, Jeff Passan is on there too. So Jeff Passan yields a big sword. I don't know if that's the proper way to say that saying, but when he writes, I mean, we pay attention, and this is really must-read material. It is behind a paywall. You have to be an ESPN Plus subscriber to read it, but, you know, I subscribe like basically for Passan, for Kylie McDaniel to read their content. I think it's worth it, but I understand not everyone is able to do that, and that's partially why I want to come on here and give the takeaways from the article, because it's that important. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. So, yeah, we are going to continue reading through this. I'm trying to see exactly where I left off. So, yeah, we're talking about the disastrous negotiations in 2020 and tying that in with what's happening now. So, Passan continues, quote, in November, Manfred played down those 2020 early coronavirus pandemic shutdown negotiations as uh, anomalous, and certainly they were under different circumstances. But to suggest they're not instructive is simply wrong, and I agree with that. The chasm between the sides today is not dissimilar from the one that wound up with Manfred implementing a season because no deal could be struck. Even that declaration took 27 days of negotiating, and almost everyone with whom ESPN spoke believes the earliest negotiations will ramp up this time is late January. These discussions are significantly more complicated than the COVID-19 shortened season, too, with far-reaching implications. The collective bargaining agreement is baseball's fascia, connecting everything in the sport and bringing disparate systems together as parts of a whole. It is where change happens, and this time around, the players want change almost everywhere. They're asking for earlier free agency, earlier arbitration, a rejiggered draft system, more money going to younger players, a higher minimum salary, less revenue sharing, and a higher luxury tax threshold, among other things. So just to pause there, that is a lot of things. And the 2020 negotiations were pretty much simply about starting a season. You would think that it wouldn't have been so difficult for the two sides. Basically, the league wanted fewer games, which was a bad look for the league, in my opinion. The players were like, we want to play. Tell us where, right? That was like the famous line from Tony Clark. It's time to get to work. Tell us when and where. Because the commissioner, based on an agreement they had signed in March when COVID-19 first disrupted the world and the sports industry, the commissioner had the power to just implement a season of X number of games, and the players would be paid full prorated salaries based on that number of games. So they were negotiating, trying to figure out if there was some other agreement they could form to deal with the situation, and they couldn't. And ultimately, the commissioner, Rob Manfred, just simply implemented a 60-game season. There was no agreement that was made. He had that power from an agreement in March, and it was in June or so that he implemented the 60-game season. I think it was in late June or even early July. So anyway, that was a pretty simple task, and they could not get through it, and it was ugly, and there was like name calling. It was just not good. And so to say, like, yeah, this is such a more complicated situation right now, and that whole thing took almost a month, and they didn't even reach a deal. So if we're talking about things aren't going to get serious until maybe the beginning of February, then the point is we're starting to look at potentially missing spring training games and missing regular season games. So Passan continues, these are major changes, but not necessarily paradigm shifting ones, even though Manfred, in a letter to fans posted immediately after he locked out the players, dramatically claimed, quote, dramatically claimed they, quote, would threaten the ability of most teams to be competitive, end quote. Passan continues, he provided no evidence to support the idea that players becoming free agents after 5 years or reaching arbitration after 2 years would ruin the sport because no such evidence exists. All is fair in labor war, including boogeymanning. The league, warding off major changes and content with the status quo, is pursuing expanded playoffs, but really is most interested in continuing its curtailed spending. So yeah, it's not like the league is seeking major change themselves. They basically don't want change. And so yeah, I mean, I think we already kind of covered the main points there. But Passan continues, baseball does not have a salary cap though having 5 teams tippy-toeing toward the $210 million competitive balance tax threshold certainly looks like a soft one. It's no surprise then that according to sources, the threshold is emerging as a potential focal point in any deal. From 2011 to the last full revenue season, 2019, the threshold rose from 178 million to 206 million. Industry revenues in that time jumped from an estimated 6.3 billion to 10.7 billion according to Forbes. That's a nearly 70% bump in revenue compared to a CBD threshold that went up 15.7%. One of the league's most recent offers included raising the CBT threshold from its current 210 million to 214 million in 2022 and ending at 220 million. The union's most recent first-year threshold offer, 245 million. MLB argues that an increase in the CBT threshold will exacerbate the disparity between large and small payroll teams. The union simply wants more room for big money teams to spend. It may be too early to call CBT discussions the bellwether of a deal, but even the most vociferous union members acknowledge the MLBPA's suite of asks will not be met. So discussions are likeliest to move forward when the players rank their importance. That, ownership level sources said, was the goal of attempting to narrow discussions during the December 1st meeting. Is competitive integrity, a phrase repeated by players who say tanking is an existential threat to the sport, truly their greatest concern? Is it getting players paid earlier in their careers, or raising the CBT so it stops cosplaying as a salary cap? Eventually, the answer will reveal itself, and how soon it does is vital to the season starting on time. 2 players said they are steeling themselves for missing games, not simply because it could happen, but because they believe it will. Others are more optimistic, believing that the possibility of missing paychecks and game revenues will spook both sides toward a deal. One official who has lived through multiple negotiations looks at it even more cynically and practically. The only thing, this is a quote from that official, quote, the only thing that's gonna move either side is mutual assured destruction, end quote. So coming up next, we're gonna, I don't know if we're gonna get to all of the rest of it, but Jeff Passan, he talked to more than a dozen sources across the whole spectrum: ownership, league officials, general managers, assistant GM, players, and talked about what they think an agreement will ultimately look like. So he's going to spell that out next and kind of wrap up this article. So we're going to get to that next as well. But first, BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond in football and basketball. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, and of course baseball when baseball resumes. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, here we go. We're going to get to as much of the rest of this as we can. I just thought this was a extremely informative article. I hope you're enjoying it so far. And without further delay, let's get to the rest of it. Passan continues, quote, in the spirit of avoiding a winter more nuclear than the one already underway, ESPN asked more than a dozen major league sources what they believe a path to a deal looks like. Most of the group, a mixture of 1 owner, 2 league officials, 2 general managers, 1 assistant GM, 4 players, 1 union official, and 2 agents, offered a version of an agreement that looked something like this. Number one, raise minimum salaries to around $650,000, a 14% bump. Add a performance bonus pool for pre-arbitration players. Implement the universal designated hitter. Expand the postseason from 10 to 14 teams. Remove indirect draft pick compensation for free agents. Make significant changes to disincentivize tanking and reward small markets. Raise the CBT threshold into the 230 million plus range and remove other restraints, including non-monetary and recidivism penalties. If this looks like it's weighted in favor of players, it is. After suffering through financial losses during the pandemic in 2020, owners do not want to relive that damage and change in the current system, and this would still amount to slight considering what would remain in place is the price that easily this is the price, and that easily beats the alternative, which of course is games lost, revenue plummeting, gambling deals wasted, and players who just wanted to emerge with a few W's increasingly angrier and willing to hold out longer. Getting a deal done allows the league to avoid wearing the blame of games lost, much of which would fall on Manfred, who has proved a quite capable scapegoat for the extremely online. So I have to pause here and say, Passan saying this, he can't work for MLB Network. We talked yesterday about Ken Rosenthal and some of the stuff he wrote criticizing Manfred, and it was kind of just like this. And it seemed to like get him not brought back at MLB Network. So Jeff Passan, another extremely well-respected baseball journalist, one of the top 5, I would say, certainly, saying similar things. And so, yeah, MLB Network just further proof to me it's not about truth-telling, it's about propaganda, which, you know, that Passan referenced that letter to fans by Manfred, which I just thought was a bunch of baloney. That was a nonsense letter. Again, propaganda. I just really don't like that. And we're going to try to tell it like it is as much as we can here. But yeah, so continuing, Passan says, and crucially, a new 5-year deal would also give MLB and the players time to dream up mutually agreeable, sustainable long-term changes, assuming they actually figure out how to talk with one another between now and then. The deal most sources proposed would mean players give up seeking free agency and arbitration earlier, which would bother groups of them certainly. And there is real concern that a 14-team playoff would have disastrous consequences if teams were to decide not to spend in free agency and to sneak into the postseason even with an average roster, although it could also incentivize more below 500 teams to spend in hopes of grabbing a playoff lottery ticket. Those potential pitfalls, the majority of people who tried to conjure a path said, are well worth what players would gain. As good as players have it, and the massive guaranteed contracts and $1.7 billion spent already this winter are undeniably good, that shouldn't preclude them from making progress in some of these areas. Wanting the CBT threshold raised and asking for competitive integrity is not hypocritical. Past agreements have not sufficiently raised the CBT. Past agreements have allowed tanking to fester. And then continuing on, this is not the next paragraph, but I think it's the final one. Passan says, so yes, February 1st is still the first litmus test. If they haven't made progress by then, chances are spring training will be delayed, which isn't a huge deal. It's March 1st that sets off the alarm. If there is no progress by then, only a quick agreement will save games, and even that might not get it done. There is still free agency to finish, and arbitration to adjudicate, and algorithms for teams to rejigger based on all the new inputs from an agreement. Players who haven't been allowed to talk with teams need to set up travel. Those in foreign countries will need help getting visas to return. Shoehorning that and 3 weeks of spring training is in spring training is nobody's idea of a good time. Did I find a typo in a ESPN.com Jeff Passan article? Is nobody's idea of a good time. So that's clearly not the last words of the article, but that's all I have copied here. So hope you found that as informative as I did. It's basically as up to the minute as you can be about what's going on with the MLB lockout. And I pretty much agreed with everything that Jeff Passan said. Obviously, he is way more connected than I am, so it's hard for me to be like, I disagree. But I just thought he was spot on in some of his, when he interjected his own opinion, I thought that he was mostly spot on. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Coming up tomorrow, I think we're going to do another mailbag. We still have some more mailbag questions from last week, which we may mix in as well. But look out on Twitter for a new prompt for a new mailbag that'll be coming out tomorrow. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Kaspick. That's Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it, leaving a review, liking, commenting, subscribing, everything you can do. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. I cannot wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Stay locked on Giants.